Hello authors, future authors, book enthusiasts, and anybody who might have stumbled upon this channel. My name is M.A. Kennedy, that's M.A. Kennedy, and I am a self-published author. My premiere historical fiction novel, The Rolling Pin, is available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. And that will actually be the topic of today's video, so if you've not had a chance to read it, you can hop on Amazon, order it and come back, or if that doesn't interest you, that's okay too. I will have many videos in the future geared towards helping you be successful in writing, so please click the subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified whenever I post. This is my very first YouTube video, so before I get started, I'd like to talk a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, but I currently live in Lyon, France with my husband. I have a background in journalism and I got my bachelor's degree in journalism, but my minor was professional writing. So writing has always been a passion of mine. However, after leaving the US to join my husband in France, I pursued a master's degree in business. I did 2 years of my master and a 6-month internship in international marketing, and I decided that business was absolutely not for me. It made me miserable, quite frankly. So I decided to leave the conventional world behind and dive headfirst into writing and becoming an author. It has taken me a little bit over a year, but I was able to write my first novel and publish. And so that's what we'll be talking about. I wanted to visit my home state and do a book signing this summer, but unfortunately, with the state of the world, I had to cancel my trip. So instead, I am just going to describe the real-life events that inspired my historical fiction novel, beyond just the general events of the Holocaust, but there are specific events that inspired me. So the most obvious one, if you read the dedication in the beginning, is the title. I was gifted a rolling pin that belonged to my step-great-grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor. And the rolling pin came from the kitchens of Auschwitz, where we believe she worked. I didn't ever get to meet her, but having this object that came from Auschwitz was very moving to me. Even though it was such a simple thing, it's just a wooden rolling pin, there's nothing special about it. And yet, there's everything special about it. Before I had anything in the novel, I had the title. I knew I wanted to name it after that. The other part that relates to my family is the last name of my main character. Her name is Ida Rothberg, and my family are the Roths. That is on my mother's side. So I wanted to honor the Jewish side of my family in a way by putting a little nod to them. I just chose the German derivative of Roth, but that's where it starts and ends. There is no other inspiration from my own personal family in this book. I read a lot to write this. I watched a lot of documentaries, and of course, I did my research because it's extremely important when you're writing a historical fiction to try and get as much of it to be correct and right as possible outside of, your characters and the scenarios that they get themselves into. It has to be believable, and this was based on things that really happened. So one of the books I read to get inspiration for the novel was by Primo Levi. It's called If This Is a Man, The Truce. And he was a Holocaust survivor. And this book is beautifully written. He gives such a description of, from the beginning, from the transport to Auschwitz and the different events that transpire for him and the people he is surrounded by. If you're interested in history, I highly recommend reading it. I was also inspired by a book by Heather Morris, The Tattooist of Auschwitz. In this book, she basically retells a story from a survivor. He has given her all this information and she has turned it into historical fiction. So you will follow the main character on his journey through Auschwitz. It's quite different. There's love, there's happiness, it's not all tears, it's not all grim. It's quite different from my novel. But it gave me a lot of good imagery and perspective because it was coming from the voice of someone who actually lived it. My major inspiration for the entire novel was a documentary called the last Nazis, and a group of journalists basically hunts down several elderly former Nazis. And you can see, if you watch the documentary, the parallels between that and my book. Basically, they wanted to know whether these people felt any remorse for their part in the mass killing of millions of people. And very dishearteningly, the overwhelming response was no. They felt like they were just doing a job. They didn't make the call. They were just following orders. And they've been able to live normal, long lives when many of the people that they were in charge of were killed either at that moment or later on after being sent to a concentration camp. It was difficult for me to comprehend as a person in 2020 that you could be responsible for so many deaths and not feel any remorse. I don't know if they just push it away because they can't deal with the fact that they were a part of that. And so they give themselves excuses, and that's, I guess, maybe their survival technique. But it gave me this idea that justice is not always served, because these people got to live an entire life, have families when many other people didn't. And it wasn't until the end of their life that some of them were put before a court. Another documentary that I highly recommend is The Accountant of Auschwitz. And this goes really into detail about that type of scenario, where a former accountant at Auschwitz had done a documentary basically giving the perspective of a Nazi to filmmakers. And this kind of put him in the limelight. Eventually, he was sent to Germany to stand trial for crimes against humanity. He was convicted, but he was in his 90s at this point. And he was a prime example of, are you culpable just because you were a part of it? And I think the response for many people would be yes. Although many of these Nazis didn't feel that way. Even today, let's say you're involved in a robbery and you didn't expect anybody to get murdered, but they do as a result of your action, as a result of the robbery. Even if you didn't pull the trigger, if someone you were with was the person to commit the murder, you would still be sentenced. You would still be convicted of murder because you were part of the reason that that person ended up dying. And so I applied that kind of logic to the trial scenes in my book. And it was a point I really wanted to drive home because that's reality. As I was writing a historical fiction, I wanted the scenario to be as real as possible. And in real life, sometimes the bad guy does get away for a really long time. Sometimes he gets away forever, but at least, we have some redemption in the end, because as a writer, I at least had control over that. Hopefully it translated well to people. I also mentioned two real life cases. One is Adolf Eichmann and one is the John Demjanjuk case. So if you have no idea what those are, there are a lot of documentaries out. There's a movie with actual actors about Eichmann. He was one of the architects of the final solution, and he actually was tracked down in South America and brought to Israel to stand trial for his crimes. And he was convicted and sentenced, and the sentence was carried out. However, in the case of John Demjanjuk, he was just one of the guards at a particular concentration camp. He was accused of being a very terrible guard, one that the prisoners called Ivan the Terrible. He was extradited from the US to Israel to stand trial. He was convicted, but eventually the conviction was overturned because they didn't have enough evidence to prove that he was this person. However, many, many years later, on this same idea that your involvement makes you responsible, he was extradited again, but this time to Germany, to stand trial for crimes against humanity. And he was found guilty this time, and that was that. But he was in his 90s already. He had a family, he had grandchildren. And if he really was this horrible, horrible man, he got to live such a normal life. And he was a big inspiration for the commander because he seemed to have absolutely no remorse. And so, though we always want three-dimensional characters, sometimes people are bad. And that's how the commander is portrayed. He is self-serving, he is narcissistic, he's a sociopath, and he doesn't have any redeeming qualities in the end. But like Demoniac, he is able to have a family and he raises children, and so to some people he might not seem like a monster. I'm sure to his children he didn't seem like a monster. So I wanted to portray that character in a realistic way. And there is a Netflix documentary all about Demoniac if you're interested. You can also read about him online. There are plenty of articles because his story dates back to, I believe, the 70s and 80s. That's when he was first extradited to Israel, and it's very, very interesting. The final inspiration from my book's ending, and something I kind of allude to throughout the whole thing, is this idea that going into an alternate reality doesn't always have to be sad and scary. And I actually watched somebody who was close to my family go through this. They seemed to have the symptoms of dementia, although I don't believe it was ever diagnosed. But from where I stood, from what I saw, it wasn't as sad as sometimes it can be. And dementia can be a very awful thing for the whole family, for everyone who's impacted. But in this particular instance, this person seemed to go somewhere where they were happy and they were young and they didn't realize that they were at the end stage of their life. And so I wanted my character to have that sort of peace, because Ida could never find peace in real life, but she always goes back to her happy place in her memory whenever she's sleeping, whenever she's going in and out of reality. It's always with her family, and she's always about to have dinner with them, and there's a fire going, and it's this warm, comforting feeling. So whether Ida slips into dementia permanently or loses her life, that's up to you. I want the reader to interpret the ending the way they want to. If you're really dying to know how I see my ending, then you can private message me and I'd be happy to tell you. But it's whatever makes you feel best about the situation. And I also want to say thank you so much for everybody who has bought this book. It's been quite a journey, quite literally. I actually went to Auschwitz to visit, to see for myself the scene that I was trying to describe. And it was such a moving and incredible experience. I'm gonna get choked up about it. So if you ever have the chance to do that, please do, because it's important to remember our past, even if it's painful. We can't grow, we can't learn if we don't look at that in the face and remember. And we're doing a disservice to the people who lost their lives if we don't acknowledge the fact that they lost their lives in such a way. So thank you again. Please hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up if you like this video. I hope everybody is surviving the isolation times well. My hair is not surviving, obviously. I have my roots grown out, but you know, we'll get there. We'll get there together. I love you guys. Bye.